Evening. I think we're going to get started. My name is Jared Eigerman. I chair the City Council's Committee on Planning and Development. This is a joint meeting and public hearing to take testimony. With me are councilors Heather Shand and Larry Gento, who sit on the committee, but you'll also see the other city councilors because this was noticed as, quote, committee of the whole, meaning all city councilors can participate. And of course, they want to hear the public in person. It's better than Memorex. So I'm going to call to order our meeting and then hand it over to my counterpart on the planning board.
This is the September 19th joint public hearing, and I'm opening the planning board meeting with all members in attendance. I just want to give you an overview of what to expect tonight. There's going to be a brief summary of where we've been and where we are in terms of creating an appropriate zoning for the Waterfront West parcels. And our Director of Planning and Development, Andy Port, will do that for us so that we're all starting with the same information. Then we will request public comment, which is actually the main purpose of tonight's meeting. We are only going to take testimony, to quote my colleague. At the end of the public comment session, we've reserved 10 minutes for New England Development to say a few words in response to anything they've heard tonight, and again focusing on the zoning. And then we will clarify next steps and adjourn. I do want to give a heads up to everybody, in case you don't make it to the end of the meeting, that the focus of tonight's meeting is public comment. Planning board and city council members will not be speaking, but we will spend all of Thursday night, a week from tonight, September 26th, deliberating on the issues, the comments, everything we've heard tonight. So that will be a proposed continuation is our plan. So we will do that formally at the end of this meeting, but just to let you know, that's why we're not speaking tonight. So I'll pass it over to Andy Port.
Thank you. So my name is Andy Port. I'm the Director of Planning and Development. My job tonight is to try to give everybody in the room, because there's lots of information on Waterfront West, to give some general information to everybody so everybody's on the same page about context, background, as we discuss the proposed ordinance amendment. As the two chairs mentioned, tonight's purpose of tonight's meeting is to get public testimony so that deliberations can happen at a later point. So some of the documents and timeframes that are important here are highlighted on this particular slide. So in 2003, there was a waterfront strategic plan. That was a document that was prepared for the city and was adopted by the city as policy statements for what it wanted to have happen in Waterfront West. 2004, there was a zoning amendment, the Waterfront West Overlay District, which is on the books now. That was developed and came out of the 2003 study. In 2017, New England Development had come in and presented a concept for Waterfront West. There were a series of meetings between 2017 and 2018 looking at various different scenarios for that development. In 2019 and ending in early January end of January this year, there was an ad hoc committee of the City Council that was created to look at this again and to evaluate the ordinance and the basic parameters and decide as policy statements again what should perhaps change. And this is going back to 2003 and 2004, so since a lot of years have passed, flood zones have changed, circumstances changed, city's priorities may have changed a bit. It made sense to revisit that. So the ad hoc committee issued a report that was, I think it was January 28th of this year. And then in 2019, again, a proposed zoning ordinance amendment, I think it was in May or June, was submitted to the City Council. And the little arrow here is just to highlight something I think is really important. So there's a lot of information on Waterfront West, a lot of different opinions. There's lots to talk about in the text of a document, like the zoning amendment. But I think what's important here is that we all focus on the key issues. And I will be at the end of this overview provide a slide that outlines some of those key issues for us to consider. And it's really important for us as a community, particularly the Planning Board and City Council and the adoption of zoning amendments, to agree upon those major issues, what we call consensus. So this is an aerial photograph of the downtown area. So that is the central waterfront right there. That's the central waterfront park, Route 1. And so the Waterfront West area is hatched in right there. That's actually an overlay zoning district in the downtown. This is an aerial photograph looking from the water side. And the red area is the Waterfront West overlay district adopted by the city. For purposes of context, that the white line that you're seeing right there is actually the boundaries of what's been discussed with the New England development over the last couple of years for potential development. So it does not, in that scenario, in those scenarios we've discussed, include Michael's or the Old Black Cow. The 2003 Waterfront Strategic Plan looked at a large swath of the city's waterfront along the Merrimack River. It was not just about Waterfront West, but Waterfront West is one portion of that, but it looked at the whole waterfront of Newburyport, the primary waterfront, and laid out some policies for that, including, in particular, Waterfront West. I'm not going to go through the next set of slides in great detail because there's a lot of content on them, but I just wanted to hit a couple of highlights. Some of the things that the city was attempting to do was to recreate and extend the downtown in similar character to what it had historically, going down to the water's edge. There were federal-style buildings built down to the water's edge. Obviously, that's not the case today. Obviously, when the Redevelopment Authority worked on the downtown, some of the buildings on the central waterfront were demolished. And what we have in that area today is mostly boat storage. There's an effort there to reconnect the city to its harbor by means of parks, public streets, plazas, and so forth, and a vibrant mix of community uses, what we sometimes as planners call active frontage or active uses on the first floors of buildings like the retail and restaurants we see in Market Square and State Street. So that plan was prepared for the city of Newburyport by consultants working with my department years ago. It was adopted by the city for policy guidance. It was a vision for the future of the waterfront, and it resulted in the adoption of the overlay district that's on the books today. Some of the primary goals were, like I said, extending the downtown, improving public access, and expanding the public spaces, the civic spaces and public parks, trying to make sure that it matched the historic character of the downtown, vibrancy of uses, the ground floor uses in particular, preservation of some of the streets and ways and squares that might be traditional in our downtown, the public spaces that would be appropriate to have in Waterfront West, just as we have in other sections of the downtown. Allowing residential above shops and things like that might be on the first floors was something else that was recommended. This is actually a sketch plan of the Waterfront West area back in 2003 when that plan was developed. The one noticeable thing from this sketch is that the plan at that time presumed that there might not be any buildings along the water's edge, that might be an active boatyard or boat marina activity. That's changed in recent time from the policy statements that we've seen adopted. So the Waterfront Strategic Plan had a couple of different things, like I said, extending the street patterns, extending Market Street to the water, McKay Street, McKay's Way, Wharf Street, and creating plazas, establishing design guidelines for the architecture to make sure it's compatible. There were what we call zero lot line setbacks, and that's because if you walk through Market Square and State Street, for instance, you'll see that the buildings come right up to the street. It's not appropriate, like elsewhere in the city, to have the buildings set back from the street. You actually want them to come up to the sidewalk. There's activation of those frontages with the shops and so forth, so you don't really want to have that set back the way you might in a residential district. Facade articulation and the fenestration of the buildings, the windows, is very important to make sure there's some compatibility. The front doors were to face public ways. There was a maximum building height recommended in that plan of 35 feet or 3 stories. And traditional window patterns, like I said, and materials, brick and slate and things like that. Allowing remote parking within 500 feet, encouraging underground parking, avoiding extensive parking lots or surface areas of parking lots, and then some other miscellaneous things related to parking. The 2004 Waterfront West Overlay District was to implement the 2003 strategic plan to do various different things, but basically to implement the recommendations that came out of that plan. And I won't go over this in great detail. I certainly can circle back on this. So one other thing that came up in that was to actually encourage affordable housing. So the 2004 Waterfront West Overlay District had some key provisions. One was a 4-acre requirement for someone to go to the planning board and ask for a special permit to do this type of development. You had to have 4 acres of land at least. That would be for the overall layout of the site. There could, of course, be individual buildings buildings within that area, but that was the starting point to make sure that the site is cohesive as a whole, as opposed to having every property owner, if it's divided up into separate owners, doing their own thing in a chaotic manner. So maximum building heights at that time were 35 feet or 3 stories, except for 2 exceptions, 40 feet for parking structures adjacent to Route 1, or 40 feet for buildings perpendicular to the river that have a quasi-commercial use on the first floor. There was a requirement for 33% of the area to be open space, excluding the public streets. Parking provided by the applicant needed to be within 500 feet for commercial uses or hotel uses, 300 feet for residential, and shared parking was to be allowed, potentially subject to review by the planning board, looking at off-peak hours and whether or not certain spaces might be available for both uses depending on their hours. There are permitting requirements in there that NED had come in, and like I mentioned in 2017, 2018, expressed some concerns about the permit process and the requirements. Some of the things that were cited there are on this slide right here. The permit requirements of going to 2 boards. We've actually talked about that in our city zoning rewrite, just as a matter of efficiency to have only 1 board involved with a review of something where there's no need for overlap. Discretionary permitting, there was a concern there about project financing, phasing of the project, and potential appeals resulting in endless litigation, and allowing certain uses that the use section of that ordinance had some conflicting language about what was allowed as a multiple use building or mixed use building, relatively minor issue. The 4-acre minimum was brought up, and frontage requirements and height requirements, particularly the height one. It seems to be something we've discussed over the last number of years. And then obviously all of that leads into what is the amount of density that can happen there, and is it a financially viable project? And that was one of the concerns that New England Development had expressed, and part of the reason we had looked at revisiting the 2004 zoning. This graphic here, and some of you who have been to these meetings before have seen some of these illustrations. This is just an overlay of that area showing the flood zones. And what, in essence, here is important is that elevation of buildings is important based on the change to the flood maps that's happened over the years since 2004. This is a map here, and what I'm highlighting in yellow in these 3 boxes is just notes that in certain areas across the site, you could have buildings that might be required to be 3, 4, 5, 6 feet above the grades that they are today in order to make them viable uses. So that's just an illustration to show, because our zoning has a height allowance, a maximum height allowance above the surrounding grade, and the concern was, well, the flood maps have changed, and if now that's raised where we can start from, if there's a cap on that and the cap is pushing down 35 feet and the bottom is pushing up, it might shrink the buildings to, say, a 2-story building, and the question becomes, 1, is that appropriate for the architectural styles of our downtown, and 2, is it a financially viable project? So that was something else for consideration, at least. The 2017 proposal by New England Development, this is just a quick slide to summarize what we saw at that time. The project would have been a reduced or a smaller area of the Waterfront West Overlay District. It was a schematic site plan that would have been reviewed and approved, a phased development sequence within that plan, what we call an as-of-right permit process with a conformance review, or confirming that the submission was complied with the provisions of the ordinance, design guidelines, and so forth. Folks will have different accounts or interpretations of what the plan showed as far as the number of buildings, because some of them got merged into blocks, if you will. But basically, there were roughly 8 buildings at that time. The major concern that was expressed at that time by a committee of the planning board and the city council working together was that the buildings were all perpendicular to the river. And while that might have been a historic feature that we might see there, the problem with that was it didn't create a very good public space anywhere on the site, because effectively you might have vehicular traffic around every single building. So there was a request there, and the city council and the planning board in particular worked with Jeff Speck, consultant, got some feedback, and went back and forth. And in essence, that was reconfigured, as you'll see in a future slide, to make a coherent space there. There were major ways to be preserved as public access: Brown's Wharf, McKay's Wharf, Tournament Wharf. The build out at that time is represented here, 145, give or take, residential units, 120 hotel rooms, and over 6,000 square feet of commercial uses. The red font there is the number of stories across the site. Obviously that varied. Higher on Merrimack Street, the 5 stories, 3 stories down by the river, and approximately 285 spaces that would be provided on site. That was a rendering that was given to us at that time. Like I said, the finger-style buildings going perpendicular to the river was a little bit concerned in terms of the public space. So New England Development, being responsive to that, revised their plan to address the layout of the buildings. These are just some renderings that they provided at that time of what Merrimack Street, for instance, might look like. This is Tournament Wharf. This is just for comparison, this is the 2003 strategic plan and the 2017 proposal by New England Development. What you'll see here, might be a little bit hard to make out. So on this plan right here, there are shown buildings that are infilling this area of the downtown where there originally were buildings, and of course those got removed over the years. But recreating these buildings as an extension of the downtown, there was an assumption at that time in the strategic plan that that might be an active boat yard in the front there and not necessarily any buildings. That obviously has been revisited since then. The buildings at that time were fingers, like I said, extending down to the water's edge. A 2018 proposal, because this was a process in evolution, resulted in some changes. For the most part, similar, the building numbers got reduced. There were some reconfigurations of them and joining of those buildings or structures to create more coherent fronts, backs, public spaces, quasi-private spaces, preservation of the ways, and then again, another assessment or estimate of the unit counts, hotel rooms, parking spaces. That was a schematic plan showing these the buildings and the volumes on the site. Some of you who have been to these meetings before have seen this. A lot of this information, by the way, is on our website, and at the last slide, I'll have a link for anybody who is not aware where to go to find this. Some renderings were provided at that time. This is a view from the Route 1 bridge looking across the site of today. This image was meant to illustrate, and one of the concerns was, will we be able to see the, quote, skyline that we see today coming across the bridge or from the water? So you see some of the church steeples there, and New England Development's plan was superimposed on top of that to show what that would look like. We received all sorts of feedback at that time on that. A lot of that was taken into account, and I'm sure there'll be more public comment tonight on what's before us tonight, the zoning amendment. The site plan at that time was revised, like I said, so that the area that you're seeing over here, instead of having a bunch of finger buildings going down to the water's edge, following the advice of the ad hoc committee that was created again by the Planning Board and City Council and with their consultant Jeff Speck, a more coherent sense of public space versus quasi-private space, which might be nestled behind the building and provide parking, for instance. This site layout, I would argue, is a better layout because it provides public space. It's more coherent, fronts of the buildings, backs of the buildings. And so that was something that had been worked on quite a bit over the course of a year and a half. The ad hoc committee report that was issued earlier this year went in pretty well in depth about looking at all the major factors in the zoning and in the development of Waterfront West, and tried to outline some priorities and some clear policy statements of what the city would want to see. A few things were left open for further consideration, but these are some of the highlights from that. So for flooding and resilience, requiring a 2-foot raise above the flood elevations for residential in particular, requiring a peer review of the flood study with a special permit that's being filed. The land uses, again, a 4-acre minimum being maintained. Mix of uses, there was discussion of requiring a hotel, something that the city has wanted for a long time in the downtown. Residential and office uses as of right, retail and restaurant uses, active first floors, and of course screening of the parking areas and residential uses potentially being allowed on secondary streets. In the original Waterfront West Overlay District, there was an assumption that perhaps every building or most of the buildings would have active first floor uses like retail and restaurant. Given it's a relatively short walk between Merrimack Street and the river's edge, that was deemed not to be a substantial concern as I understand it. Public space, there was a very high importance put on a pedestrian route along the east-west along the river, the extension of essentially a boardwalk between Michael's and the Old Black Cow and our central waterfront. 33% minimum open space, again excluding the streets. Public access easements so that the public would be guaranteed permanent access through those spaces. It would not be a, quote, private space, but actually all those ways would be public. A 10,000 square foot minimum for public square that would be lined with what we call facilities of public accommodation, which is, again, like I said earlier, those active frontage uses, the retail, the restaurants, things that are of benefit to pedestrians in these public spaces in a downtown. There are some quasi-public streets that were important to call out and to try to preserve in some format. Wharf Street going east-west across the waterfront, Tournament Wharf, Market Street Extension, the McKay's Wharf, and Brown's Wharf Way. As far as dimensions, there were a couple of things that were brought up there, making sure that there was compatibility with the federal style buildings downtown, but not necessarily conformity to the exact same styles. So there was an understanding there that buildings could be similar without necessarily being exact duplications or replications of the buildings that are in our downtown. Requiring a 3D model for a valid or a fair assessment of what is being proposed. So a 3D model, particularly for the building massing, but also for detailing potentially. Zero lot line setbacks, like I talked about earlier. We want the buildings to be brought up to the street in the downtown or a public space. And then there was some discussion for further study of lot coverage, frontage, and so forth. But in particular, this last one, the building heights, and there was discussion of the possible need for looking at a 3D model to make some final decisions about what those building heights should be across the site. And I'll speak to that again in a minute. But that was a primary issue that required a little bit further analysis. Vehicular and pedestrian circulation, it was important put on differentiation of surface materials, so it'd be very obvious to pedestrians, cars, bicyclists, where it was appropriate for them to be, make sure they're not in conflict. Obviously there are things like planters and bollards and things like that that can be used, but surface treatment is also a very good cue for those types of things. A continuous 10 to 12 foot harbor walk to make sure it's wide enough, similar to what we have on our central waterfront. Reducing the size of the surface parking areas, similar to what we have been trying to do by taking parking off our central waterfront, putting that into a garage and reducing the footprint of the parking. That was a expressed desire here for Waterfront West, again, not to have a sea of parking in our downtown. The pedestrian being prioritized over the automobile in general. Again, it's a downtown. So one of the goals with the garage we have right now is to get our cars off the street into the garage so that pedestrians can then walk everywhere from there. All parking was to be provided on site or in close proximity without the use of public parking facilities. Parking required for principal uses was, there were numbers put in the committee's report recommending a threshold for those. So for a hotel, 1 per guest room, marina, 0.5 per slip, residential, depending on the size of the number of bedrooms in the units. For affordable housing, minimum 12% of all units being affordable with what we call 80% of the area median income. That's the what we typically refer to as affordable housing. They'd be deed restricted so that they would remain that way. And there was discussion of the possibility of giving consideration for units if there were 50% AMI units, much lower and more the lower income folks, that there might be some benefit to the city in doing that, or alternatively increasing the percentage of affordable units to 15% or something along those lines. That was something that was considered. And then forbidding the placement of those units off-site was something that was discussed. The Housing Trust has weighed over on this issue over the years and was concerned that housing units that are affordable be integrated throughout neighborhoods as opposed to being clustered into just one neighborhood, whether it's on-site or off-site. And what we call payment in lieu. So developers in various communities will sometimes propose to pay the city for the markup or the cost, the reduction there from a market rate unit to the affordable unit, and say, here's the gap. You can go and create those units. Take that money and do that, as opposed to us building it. The problem with that for the city, it generally would be, or a public entity would be, that there's a real cost for us in going out and enabling or mobilizing a project like that. So doing a project of our own with just the money that's captured by a payment in lieu is not necessarily efficient, whereas if a contractor or developers out there doing a large or mega project, for them to absorb the cost of that mobilization and the cost of the work involved is much easier. So doing payment in lieu is sort of generally frowned upon. Design standards, minimum standards for window fenestration and building articulation, forbidding flat roofs, high quality materials, varied architecture for visual interest for the pedestrians, and clear fronts and backs to the building facades. Like I said, the plan that the committee worked on with New England Development over some time resulted in at least a layout that had a clear front and back. The permitting process, the ad hoc committee report had called for an area-wide special permit from the planning board. Site and architectural design review from the planning board as part of that process. Requiring a development agreement. This is a document done outside of zoning, but it's for the purposes of, and without getting into a lot of complexity here, for the purposes of enforcing project phasing, mitigation that might be required and desired by the city with the developer, and public benefits. And there's a reason mechanically or legally for doing that in a development agreement, not just in the zoning, because there's a greater level of protection. And I won't go into that in more detail, but that's the reason for having a development agreement as an additional layer of protection for the city beyond what zoning might provide. There were various studies that might be required as part of the application at the planning board, traffic study, parking study, and the others that you see listed here. There was particular emphasis put on wanting to see a 3D model of building massing at the time of application, and photo simulations from what we call publicly accessible vantage points. Not so much looking from every private angle, but really to see what is the general public going to see on a frequent basis, and to make sure that that is appropriate, the result would be appropriate. Flood mitigation study, we've obviously talked about that in prior meetings, and any sustainability measures, whether it be LEED or low impact development techniques, anything to make the site more efficient and more environmentally responsible in whatever is developed. As far as public benefits, the report actually itemized a number of things. 3 things that were at the top of the list were possible funding for expanding Market Landing Park, what we refer to as the Newburyport Redevelopment Authority Central Waterfront. We're obviously working towards that right now, but money would be needed or will be needed to expand that park with more formal improvements in the coming years. Signalization of the Route 1 and Merrimack Street intersection. Obviously, if more trips are being generated to the Waterfront West area by more development, the argument is that signalization of that intersection is necessary because particularly during the summer season, there's a lot of traffic that goes through there. It's hard for folks to navigate in an elongated intersection with multiple ways of getting in and out. So dealing with that as a public benefit or mitigation of the project. And then a question of whether or not greater affordability or other provisions for affordable housing might be captured in there. The list that you're seeing at the bottom here are other items that were mentioned as possible public benefits that might be considered by the city. I won't go through those all individually, but there was, what's important here is that there was discussion of not just mitigation from the project itself. So, one could certainly have a discussion about traffic improvements being mitigation for the project, but say money for the Central Waterfront Park would be a public benefit, something that's not driven by the project, but the developer could perhaps put on the table to make sure that there's the project as a whole is providing to the city for its needs as well. So out of that ad hoc committee report, what came out of that was 3 things that were expected to happen after that. One was to look at a 3D model. It was understood that New England Development would continue to work on a 3D model of that site. The main reason for that was to confirm the acceptable building heights across the site. The ad hoc committee report had, and I'll go over this, had some heights that were called out as sort of baseline or placeholders, but there needed to be an assessment of that with a 3D model to really assess what are the views, what are the angles that we're preserving or obstructing, as the case may be, and what might need to change in the building heights or volumes in order to protect the views that folks are interested in, while still allowing some reasonable form of downtown development. A draft zoning amendment to codify the agreed upon parameters and put those on the books, or at least get that, what I call the vehicle to do that. That's what we have this evening is a draft zoning for discussion, and things like that are often revised before they're adopted. And a draft development agreement, again, specifying the public benefits and any special terms that the city might want to provide an extra level of protection on. The proposed zoning amendment, just a couple of overviews of that in particular. So it maintains the 4-acre requirement for development. There's introduction of what we call a master development plan, or MDP. That plan would be approved by the city council. I would liken that to being similar to a special permit where the uses, some of the major components of the project are called out, and once that master development plan is approved, the assumption was that from there, and this ordinance is written this way, is that the planning board will look at the building layout and architectural review, or BLAR, to one, confirm that it's consistent with the city council's approved master development plan, and I'll show an example of that in just a second. That master development plan would show where the building footprints would generally be, where the public spaces would be, where parking might be allowed, and any other parameters that the city might feel are necessary to document in there. And then the planning board would look at the more site-level details, the smaller scale, finer grain things in each phase of that development as it might proceed. Requiring a mix of uses was again important. So in this ordinance, it calls for a hotel, residential, and retail and restaurant uses. Affordable housing, again, 12% of all units. The open space requirement is 25%. At least one public space has to be 10,000 square feet or more, and I think that came out of the ad hoc report. And then again, the residential being 2 feet above the floodplain for hazard mitigation in future decades or centuries. Another key set of provisions, the building heights. There's an allowance in the proposed zoning for 35 feet for buildings that are 400 feet from Merrimack Street, so that's really down by the water's edge. 55 feet for buildings with frontage on Merrimack Street. I'm sure there'll be some discussion about the technical terminology and how these things are defined, but that was the sort of working premise in the draft. There's 45 feet for all the buildings in between the water's edge and the Merrimack Street side. Those are the basic parameters. There's obviously finer grain details we can talk about, but this is just an overview. There are architectural standards call out in there. They're calling into play some design standards that were already adopted by the City Council years ago in our so-called 40R Smart Growth District around the train station. And that was adopted at that time and intended to give the planning board much greater teeth and more specificity about the design standards for the buildings. Like I said, the fenestration of the buildings with the windows, the articulation of the facades, so that we don't have large expanses of blank buildings or what we might consider ugly, but need better terms to define them. The major ways being preserved, Browns, McKay's, and Tournament. And then parking requirements. Coming out of the ad hoc committee's report, a basic requirement for those. One note, for the retail and other uses, the ordinance allows off-site parking in close proximity or the use of public parking with payment into the city's so-called Intermodal Transportation Improvement Fund, which is in order to utilize public parking in a nearby area for the purposes of meeting zoning requirements. You're not necessarily getting a guaranteed space for your tenants, but you're allowed to use those spaces for calculating what you need for zoning to get approvals. The ordinance in this draft would allow that to be done with payment of the allocated amount, $7,500 per space, into the city's fund. That was actually a section of the zoning ordinance that was adopted, I think, a year or two ago, but that is already on the books. The permitting process, just a comparison between the 2004 existing Waterfront West Overlay District and the proposed amendment. The permit types back in 2004 were essentially a special permit that goes hand in hand with a site plan approval of all the level details. In the proposed amendment, there's this so-called master development plan, which I would liken to the special permit and site plan approval. There's a building layout and architecture review, which is a more fine-grained review of the details of the site and the architecture that would have to be reviewed and approved by the planning board. And then there's this outside document, the development agreement, that might capture and, for the city's protection, require that certain things be put into a contract, not just in zoning, because we have these provisions and statutory provisions for zoning that allow certain things to be grandfathered or exempt, and so it's good to have that extra layer of protection. The primary permit granting authority in the 2004 ordinance we have on the books is the planning board. The proposed amendment calls for the city council to be the primary permit granting authority for the overall layout of the site, recognizing its importance in the downtown. And the secondary permit granting authority in the original ordinance, the one that's on the books today, there was not a second one, there was only the planning board. In the current one, after the city council would approve that master development plan or layout for the whole site, then the planning board would look at that finer grain detail, like I said, as a BLAR. Some folks, I realize there was probably a lot of confusion out there in the general public in particular about what is the difference and why are we discussing tonight the zoning. We've also seen this set of renderings and plans from a New England development. And so I just put, again, another summary here of what we've seen from New England development. While we're not really talking about the development scheme that New England Development has proposed this evening, we're talking about the framework of the zoning, and that's what's really important here is the framework. What do we want to have as a permit process, and what do we want the requirements to be for that type of development? Having this development plan before us is helpful in evaluating the ordinance itself. It goes back the other direction and helps us to evaluate whether or not the draft ordinance is giving us what we want. What we've seen in that plan is approximately 5.7 acres within the Waterfront Overlay District. It's based generally on the zoning amendment. There might be a few deviations to discuss. There's a schematic master development plan. All this is on our website, by the way, and I'll point folks to those. There's a 3D model, or at least photo simulations from that 3D model to look at to, again, provide a basis for finalizing those building heights that are appropriate across the site. Impact studies were provided by New England Development to address traffic, utilities, flood conditions, fiscal impact, et cetera. There are approximately 7 buildings arranged in blocks, and the build-out is shown here, slight variations from previous, but just to give you an idea, and the number of parking spaces and stories allowed. I say that the master development plan, or the information submitted by New England Development, while we are talking about the city's ordinance, and that is our priority as city officials, it is actually helpful to have that information. And the reason I say it is we've heard a number of times before about the density of the development in Waterfront West and whether that's the appropriate density, whether it should be more or less, and where that line should be drawn. For me as a planner, to me it's not pointing to any arbitrary number we might pull out of a hat. What matters is really what is the actual arguable impact on the public. So the impacts to the public generally of build-out and development are things like traffic, impacts on water and sewer, impacts if it's the volume of building, impact on views or heights, things like that. But arbitrary numbers aren't necessarily the best way of gauging what's appropriate on a site. We should really look at the secondary adverse impacts, potentially of that development. So one thing that is visible in looking at NED's master development plan that then helps to circle back and help us inform what may or may not change in the draft zoning is the fact that there are parking spaces shown in the public space on the master development plan. Because the draft language does not explicitly or clearly enough preclude that or preclude it enough, we now have the discussion that's been happening. We've received some public comments on, we've had conversations internally, but there's some concern there that the vehicles might be conflicting with the public space, and if we want it to be truly public space, that we might need to reduce the amount of vehicle conflict there. There's also a pinch point that's been called out here. Again, this comes down to what's the overall site layout. So while we're not looking at the master development plan tonight, it is important to look at the zoning and important by what we might look at in schematic plans, because it helps to tell us whether or not what we're approving in the zoning is enough to guarantee us that the master development is what we want. And so by making sure, for instance, that building heights are appropriate or setbacks are appropriate, we might avoid situations like this where there's parking in the public space or a pinch point that creates a problem. One other concern that isn't related to specifically on the site that New England Development was proposing for the master development plan, but is relevant to parking, is the fact that we know, for anybody who's been down to that area frequently, you know that Michael's parking sprawls sometimes off-site and onto the area where the boats are stored. And so if a development plan is proposed for this site, irrespective of how many parking spaces are required for that, we need to recognize the fact that there are adjacent uses, and to the extent that those adjacent uses may be already utilizing that site for something, we can't necessarily displace parking and not be cognizant of that and the potential impacts. So parking, what I'm pointing at here is the fact that the master development plan helps to inform us as to whether or not the build-out that the zoning would allow is the appropriate threshold. And what I would argue here is that rather than focusing on a specific number of units or number of keys of your hotel rooms, to actually focus on what the measurable impacts of that build-out is. And one of certainly is volume of the buildings, but in this case, the public space being primarily for pedestrians. That was a priority set by the city. And what may be allowed if we don't tweak that language before adoption is parking in public spaces. So that's just something that helps us to refine the language. NED provided some very helpful 3D models, or at least the photo simulations of that. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but I can certainly circle back on that as needed. And what this information is all on our website as well. The photo simulations, there's a link to a website here. I apologize for this little loading. But this is a vantage point from the water side. Some of you may have already looked at this, but there are a couple of vantage points across the site. And what this allows us to do is, this is the plaza area that we were looking at. This allows us to look at those spaces and have that discussion where the ad hoc committee left off. With the ad hoc committee's tentative recommendations for building heights now with the 3D model, we can compare those and evaluate, does this feel like the scale that we're looking at across the site? This particular view I'm switching to here is a view with Horton's Yard on the right, and on the left side you're seeing a plaza area out by Merrimack Street across from our new parking garage, and this is the roadway down there towards the waterfront. So again, it's helpful for us to visualize when we start writing text and ordinances, what is the impact that might be allowed by that zoning. And so we see some of that here. We can certainly have debate about whether or not the renderings conform exactly to the draft zoning. There's a step back requirement for upper floors. This may not quite meet that setback, but again, to get a sense of volume and height compared to other structures in the area. So that's what that model is helpful for. So I think what's important here from my perspective is we've received a number of comments. I'm sure we'll continue to receive a lot of comments. We'll try to share those comments as efficiently as we can. We'll post things. There is really, I would suggest, a finite list of substantive issues that need to be discussed. Some of these have already been discussed quite at length over time, but rather than focusing on a word or certain provision of the ordinance itself, I think it's important that we focus on the big level issues first, as the ad hoc committee had done, looking at the high level questions first, agreeing upon those, and then deciding where to go with those. My office, legal counsel, and others can continue to work on revisions to the text of the ordinance that is now before the council to try to address those things mechanically, but as long as we need to have a starting point where there's consensus or agreement. Otherwise, making those mechanical adjustments are not helpful because we're just working in a vacuum. So density, building height, the massing, the volume, that's the number one thing we've heard repeatedly, and I'm sure there'll be comments about that tonight. Mitigation of project impacts, so are there any impacts on traffic, water and sewer, and what needs to be done to address those impacts? So like I mentioned, the Route 1 at Merrimack Street intersection, the sewer department has mentioned there's a blockage between their site and the sewer treatment plant that would need to be upgraded as part of that. It's technically off-site, so that would be mitigation that would be needed for the project or the development under this zoning amendment. So these are the types of things we'd want to have under consideration, at least, when we adopt a zoning amendment to allow any type of development. The permitting process and who's in charge of who's the permit granting authority. So my staff and the planning board, I'm sure, have some thoughts on who should be the controlling party in the permit and what process should unfold there. How much time should staff have? How much time should the planning board have? How much time should city council members have or anybody else have to weigh in on what's been proposed and for the revisions to happen to those plans if something is filed later on? Who is actually in charge of that permit process? Adequate parking for all uses on site, or at least in whatever format, whether it's on site, nearby off site, making sure there's adequate parking so it essentially does not displace any other parking conditions we have downtown. Flood hazard mitigation and resiliency. So does the ordinance call for the development to address resiliency issues, so-called sea level rise, flood zones, and is the ordinance calling for the best we can reasonably get, recognizing that it is in a downtown area, we can't relocate. Criteria for energy efficiency and sustainability. The Energy Advisory Committee had given us some comments, as did the Resiliency Committee on these things. So we have some thoughts, or at least initial feedback on certain types of criteria. So we hear the LEED criteria. It's a certification process, but there are certain criteria you can use to make sure that the equipment in the buildings are efficient, that solar is used where possible, rain cisterns are used for water for irrigating landscaped areas. So there are lots of things like that that could be done, and so the code can actually codify and make those a mandate or requirement when the developer comes in to do permitting under an ordinance like this. So we've received some feedback on particulars that might be added to cover that ground. The quality of the public space and the pedestrian connectivity. So like I mentioned, the vehicles in that space, there's a concern there about making sure that whatever that space is, that it's high quality space that we would see similar to, say, Market Square or State Street, the high quality spaces we all prize. Whether or not there's a hotel, and if so, what are the requirements for that hotel? So some things that come to mind are, what's the size of the hotel? How many keys? How many rooms? What type of hotel is it? Is it a boutique style hotel or something different? Does it have any conference or meeting space that might also be beneficial to the city and other entities as we try to stimulate our economic development downtown, particularly off season? What are the affordable housing requirements? The Affordable Housing Trust for the city has comments on this. Other parties have different feelings as to where that threshold should fall, but there is sort of general consensus there should be affordable housing in the project, a portion of it. There certainly could be debate as to where that final number ends up being. Architectural compatibility with the downtown, again, focusing, I think, less on matching the exact architectural design we have downtown, but actually trying to have some compatibility with that, recognizing there are new modern techniques that can be used, but having it at least be compatible with the downtown. And then the required public benefits, which I think are best addressed through a development agreement. It's a separate track that the City Council working on, but but that's works hand in hand with the zoning change itself. So the reason I put this slide together is because I think it helps to outline, it's probably going to cover the big issues we're going to hear from folks commenting on tonight. A lot of those I think will capture some of these things. The first one, the density to height and building massing, that's something we've heard repeatedly, so we'll probably hear a little bit more about that tonight. But again, there are a finite list of substantive issues, mechanical issues, those can be dealt with, and I think it's important we not focus on those, but focus on these policy level issues. So with that, I would pass it back to the chairs for, I think, public comment.
Thank you. Andy, can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
With the 11 items that you had. Okay, so now we're going to go to the 2-minute drill portion of the evening. That applies to me and Chair Sontag as well. So just realize that Andy Port, our planning director, had to condense years into his presentation at the beginning here. The ad hoc committee alone met 6 times over 8.5 hours. So we spent a lot of time trying to give policy direction to staff. And then what came out of that was the draft ordinance that is before us now. The ad hoc had 5 counselors voting on it out of 11, and they were all invited to attend. So I do want to emphasize tonight that written comments are a better place, and we've already gotten some really good ones, including for the attorney from the abutter from Horton's Yard had some very insightful ones. The planning board has already met on this and had very detailed comments that they reduced to minutes. So we already know we have some rewriting to do of the draft ordinance, which is our working document. But tonight, I think in your 2 minutes each, the most fruitful thing would be to focus on in one or some or all of these 11 areas. Remember, we're at the zoning stage, so we're trying to actually codify the policy. Once the policy is codified, there then is a mechanism for a master plan to actually be reviewed. So although we have a informational master plan application in, and I want to also echo what Andy said, which is that it's helpful to put into context what the zoning is. So the ad hoc said, well, we need to know what 45 feet, 55 feet, 35 feet look like in height. And so that's why it was helpful to get that material, those photo sims. But again, tonight is about the big picture. You only have 2 minutes each. Thank you.
And I'd just like to reinforce the idea that not only do we want to hear your concerns and your criticisms, we'd also like your ideas about what you would like to see. That would help us the most. So I'm not trying to be Pollyanna about this, but I do want to hear if you could rewrite the zoning in any way on any topic, what would you like to see in it? Relating to these topics or to anything else you've read or talked about it. Again, this is not about the New England Development proposal. It's only there as a backdrop. We're really looking at standards, criteria, layout of the site, and we'd really appreciate your comments on that. And with that, I'll just remind you that when you come up to speak to the microphone, would you please give your name, your address, and we'll be limiting your comments to 2 minutes with a timer. So please come forward and speak to us.
Okay, will it? Okay. Good evening. Good evening. My name is Michael Lambert. I live at 58 Merrimack Street. I'm a direct abutter to the site. I live in above Interlocks. And if any one of you has ever used the driveway, McKay's Wharf, which is to the left of our building, perhaps to get down and get a cup of coffee or something, you'll know that it drops down. It drops down to our garage door. And I'm so glad that Andy put up the VR, the 3D that we were all promised last November when we were all here, and that meeting ended quite raucously when it was demanded that they come back with a 3D view, which we still haven't seen, because that view is wrong. It's a wrong view, and yet it's being propagated as a quality view. And I waited, probably like most of you, months and months and months for that view to come out, and it never came out. And then to come to find out that some of our counselors are meeting with NED outside of the public purview, this still troubles me very much that we still haven't got what we've demanded from them several times is what is it going to look like? Jim McKay, normally unflappable, I can remember him at a meeting almost pounding the table. And even Jared at one time at a private meeting said, I want to see what it looks like. And they have yet to show us what it's going to look like. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Carrie Morrison. I live at 12 Russell Terrace. I am a resident and local business owner for going on 3 years in our beautiful city. I am against this current proposal for a few reasons. One, the proposed visual appearance is nothing like that of the rest of the city, and it would not blend into our cityscape at all, creating an eyesore that is visible as soon as you cross the Merrimack River. Two, we do not need more storefronts when we already have empty storefronts downtown who are fighting to keep their doors open with ever-increasing rents. Three, we do not need more restaurants when we already have empty restaurant space and not enough bodies to fill the seats during the colder months of the year. Four, we are not looking to become another Boston where we just drastically increase our regular community footprint by adding 200 plus more homes in addition to hotel rooms. This city is a small treasure on a map that draws people from all over the world to experience its quaint and historical beauty and special energy. People from all over, including myself, have been drawn to this area because of how connected we are to each other and how holistically oriented we are as a community. We are a clean and beautiful city that would not survive a drastic influx of new homes, but we would welcome more visitors in the off-season months. This is truly what our city needs. When I heard we would be getting a hotel in Newburyport, I was excited for the future opportunities that would bring. In April 2018, I hosted an Australian researcher who came all the way to Newburyport to share her scientific findings on self-healing for a 90-minute seminar. Her presence garnered more than 90 area residents and professionals for her educational offering. The only place I could accommodate her gathering was this very room in the City Hall. Additionally, in March and April of 2019, I attempted to bring a group of 40 energy psychology professionals to our great city over 2 weekend trainings, and we could not accommodate them. Instead, we had to book our trainings in Woburn, Mass, and send those dollars somewhere else. These people would have invested in our restaurants and stores during a time when we need more financial support. They also would have respected and adored our quaint community and would have absolutely wanted to come back again. As a regular community educator, I have seen the barriers of this community, being that we do not have large spaces to accommodate big events, conferences, and/or private functions. We also do not have the lodging to accommodate large groups or people who want to gather in sacred energy of our wonderful city. We have all the activities
Your 2
and
minutes
sites.
is up. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Please sit
So
down.
I would
Thank
just love to see like a Beauport hotel here where we have more space for everybody to meet. Thank you.
Hi, Yvonne Chabrier, 34 Warren Street. So first I want to thank everybody who's worked so hard to try to bring our community interests here in what happens to Newburyport to mesh with the development. This is, after all, private property. We can only try to work as hard as we can so that what does get built serves us all. Certainly, the hotel is a necessity. That is clear. My concerns are for the, when you talk about 55 feet, I'm not quite sure what that is. I can look at the Horton Yard building. I can look at 44 Merrimack Street, that wonderful old building built in 1915 that is adjacent to the Horton Interlocks building. And I like that we're going to bring the new buildings right up to the front. We need that strong street feeling and that rhythm that we have in Newburyport. That's what we like. We like that tight, the tight facades along the street. The height, I don't know what 55 feet is. Is that 3 stories, 4 stories? It depends on the height inside, what the height of the ceilings are, whether you have, two stories at 55 feet where you have cathedral ceilings. So I'd like to really see a model so that we can see the massing. It doesn't have to be detailed, but a real model that we can look at to see what that height along Merrimack Street would be. So that's number one concern. And then it steps back so that we get that slope that we already have with the buildings that right now front on Merrimack Street. Number two, when you talk about 100, let's see, was it 100,000? That seems awfully big. 10,000, how many thousand square feet is the major public space? Okay, 10,000. I was thinking about how do you get that 10 times 100? No, never mind. Where is it? Is it where we're hauling the boats out of the water? Because we want to keep that access to the water. We don't want something between us as we're walking along.
Thank you. Yeah.
So that's number 2 concern.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Linda Lambert, 58 Merrimack Street, Horton's Yard. And I've spoken many times on Waterfront West, but tonight I want to speak as an abutter. I've sat through lots of different meetings from Planning Board and Zoning Board on many different properties, and the questions always to the developer included, did you check with the abutters? Did you resolve the issues with the abutters? Do you have letters in support from abutters? If I'm forced to forego my rights in the special permit process as an abutter because of accepting an ordinance that replaces those rights, then as abutters, our needs and concerns need to be addressed before the ordinance is approved. The language in the ordinance favors the developer over the abutters. It states that buildings fronting Merrimack Street are allowed to be 55 feet as intended by the subcommittee, but then excludes all grades around the perimeter except for the piece on Merrimack Street. 15 feet of grade change, most of which is pretty immediate, is excluded in this calculation. When the ordinance states that there are 0 setbacks except 10 feet from existing residences, i.e. Horton's Yard, it ignores property lines and it allows the developer to put a 45-plus tall building within 10 feet of the Horton's Yard building, completely blocking the whole building. 10 feet is too close, 20 feet is too close, and it's too high. If you could stick to 35 feet for the building that is closest to Horton's Yard, if you could set it back more than 20 feet, then that would be listening to the abutters. When the ordinance states rooftop structures and mechanicals are not required to be shielded, how do I trust that they won't be put in plain sight on top of those buildings up against my windows 10 feet away, now making the structure higher than Horton's Yard? When the ordinance states that long flat roofs are discouraged but allowed, and the developer can still propose flat rooftops in the majority of the development, as the drawing showed,
The timing
then that's
has gone
unclear
off.
language.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Good evening, Judy Timon, 39 Lime Street. So I have 3 issues that I want to discuss. I think zoning should be crafted with the community's interests in mind, and I don't think that's the case. I think this zoning is crafted with the applicant in mind. The master plan permit should be by special permit with the planning board, not with the city council. The planning board is the land use board, has years of experience, has planners, developers, and the city council, frankly, is not equipped with the knowledge to make this decision. I have not heard any good reason for the city council to have this authority. Yes, it's an important project, it's a big project, all the more reason for it to be reviewed and permitted by the planning board. There are other communities where master plan permits are permitted by planning boards through special permit. Watertown, Plymouth, Lincoln, just to name 3. Second issue, where's the development agreement? I have not heard anything about a development agreement. Before any zoning is acted on, the development agreement should be fully vetted in public and voted on by the city council. That's the purview of the city council. And my comments are very consistent with the comments made by this planning board. There is a document that's a public document. Planning board made comments directed at the city council, and I quote, "I do not understand the benefit, the precedence of transferring permit granting controls from the planning board to the city council. Projects should be reviewed under special permit." Quote, "This does not provide for adequate review of land use planning and off-site impacts. This zoning does not allow for appeals, and there's no criteria set to grant the permit." Quote, "The timing of the development agreement is important. Prior to the enactment of the zoning, the agreement should be finalized." One other thing, is not enough affordable housing. 20%, not 12%, twice as much
Thank
if
you.
it's off-site. Thank you.
Thank you.
As I've mentioned in other meetings, we would prefer that people not be demonstrating their enthusiasm for one speaker or another. It would help us get through the evening a little more efficiently. Thank you very much.
Ted Jones, Newburyport. I would ask that the planning board, 18 Dawes Street, D-A-W-E-S. I would ask that the planning board and at a later date the city council reject the change in the update to the WWOD, as the buildings are too dense, way too tall. I can't even imagine driving along Merrimack Street and having a wind tunnel between the garage and 55-foot story buildings, which, according to most of the people you listen to, will be taller than that once you get the mean height of the building and the floodplain and everything else. I would, in a worst case scenario, go back to the overlay district we had in 2004. I know you've had a lot of meetings and so forth, but since then, the new proposals are all gone up. We got more condo units. We got 7 buildings still instead of 8. There used to be 5. And if you look at the planning board's schematic drawings, I know it's not a model, but it gives you a pretty good indication of how high it's going to be with the hotel and everything right on the river and very close to the water. And if that doesn't work, going back to the 2004 WWOD, I would say have the applicant file for a special permit and see what happens then. As far as this is supposed to be compatible with the downtown, I don't know what year that was. We had 5-story buildings downtown. This is not compatible to the waterfront in the 1800s now, and it's not compatible to the buildings downtown. Most of them are 2 or 3 stories, not 5. So I see nobody gaining from this except the applicant, and I know this is not about, it's about zoning, but coincidentally, it's the same time frame as us changing things over. And the city council is accountable to the voters of Newburyport, and I haven't seen too many people writing to the paper saying they want this development. I have seen none, unless it's been somebody that's been a project manager. Thank you.
Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa 30 Green Street on Newburyport, on behalf of Horton's Yard, including 32 residents and several businesses of the city, all of whom are very committed to the future success of the city of Newburyport. So I'm going to highlight some of the matters that I provided to both the board and the city council in my earlier comments. My clients respectfully request the city not pass this zoning in its current form until the height and setback requirements for the adjacent buildings are addressed. The zoning is clear about the process for an MDP and the role of the city council as special permit granting authority, which is what is implied but not stated either by design or on purpose. The BLAR process is amended to make it a public hearing and a butter notice similar to major site plan review. It is clear who's paying for the roadway improvements that are discussed in the traffic report, and that it not be the city of Newburyport taxpayers, and that the development agreement be entered into before the zoning is passed and not after the cake is delivered on the proverbial platter. As to the height issues and the setback requirements, I've provided all of you a schematic that was created by Everett Chandler of GEC Winter Street Engineering, and he went out and took measurements along the side of the building based upon the current elevations and floodplains. And the current proposal allows a building to be built as tall as that tallest line on the plan in front of you. That's approximately where the floodplain would be, and you take the the measurement of the height of the building, which is different than how we measure height in anywhere in the city, anywhere along the waterfront that is also in the floodplain, and you add the height on top of that. Along Horton's Yard, you can place a building against the property line and then up one floor, go in 10 feet. That's what you're allowed to do under the zoning. So you essentially, Horton's Yard has a 4-foot setback from their property line. So if you look at that photo, that's what happens. And so I request that you make sure that you address that height requirement. May I come back at the end of the line? I have a couple of other things to say.
We'll see. Thank you.
My name is Frank Cousins. I'm the president of the Newburyport Chamber of Commerce. I live on 6 Orange Street. I'm a citizen in the city of Newburyport. I wanted to start off by saying that support the proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance under discussion tonight, so I think it's beneficial to the city of Newburyport for some of the following reasons. The proposed amendment implements the City Council's ad hoc committee report recommendation that were drafted by the city staff and therefore align with the city's expressed interests and goals. Any project proposed under the amendment zoning would be subject to extensive review by the City Council, the Planning Board, in approving the master plan. Adopting a master development plan ensures consistency with the city's planning goals, and in short, we get what we voted for. It's very important, I think, for the Planning Board, the City Council to continue to work with the developer to really ensure that we get something moving forward here. We've got 5.7 acres of prime property that is looking to be developed. I think it's clearly beneficial to the city and report. They're looking at putting over $100 million into infrastructure and building down there. And I also believe that getting a hotel is beneficial to the city and report for people to stay, and it also would help restaurants and businesses downtown. But I think there's a willingness for all parties to work together to move this particular project forward. I think that, as I stand here tonight, and I think about 30 years ago, talking about that particular site would be best developed for the city and report and leaving the central waterfront open and making those statements 30 years ago. And we look at where we're at today, and I think that we're in a position where if everybody works together, we could get something done down here and we could move this forward and really kind of complete what would be a beautiful waterfront in the city and report. Thank you.
Good evening. Jay Iannini, 26 Summit Place. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone sitting in front of me for all the hard work that you've put in. I'm sure that this has been quite the bear to tackle, and I do appreciate all of that. I also want to thank everyone who spoke before me and whoever's going to speak behind me, because I think it's great that we come together as a community and voice both our support and concern. And I'm here actually in favor and supporting of the proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance under discussion. I think this is potentially a great project for the city. Obviously, we have quite a few stewards here in this room who are going to look out after it. That includes the planning board, that includes the city council. I have faith that they're going to make the right decisions, and I have faith that everyone behind me is going to help with that decision-making process. To answer Councilor Eigerman's question, which he directed to us about what's important in terms of the numbers up there, I think affordable housing in Newburyport is really something that's of grave concern to me right now. We really need to address this. I think required public benefits are very important as well. Obviously, this is a huge project. I think we have very few opportunities to have this much impact at once in the city, so let's get as much impact as we possibly can. The tax benefit, I think, as someone who's supportive of public education, seeing somewhere between $1 and $1.3 million flow into the city's coffers as a result of this, I think that's very important and hasn't been stated yet. And I just want to be able to walk my dog along a boardwalk from Cashman Park straight down to the main central waterfront park. I think that'd be a great thing for everyone in the city. So again, thank you very much for your consideration and for listening.
Good evening. Andy Simpson, 1.5 Greenleaf Street. And I want to also thank all the councilors and planning board members and citizens and all of you bringing your expertise and time to try to get this right. And I also have confidence that you will. Some of my questions are thoughts about this have to do with sort of trying to understand sort of what the quality of life will be in this area. So I understand there's 215 residential units. I'm not sure I found a number of then how many people that is in the area, but it may be in there. But they boiled it down to having, whatever that number is, only 23 kids, which is great for the school system, I guess. I don't know. But it sounds like, you know, it sounds like an over 55 community. And I'm an old guy, I like old people. I'm an old guy, you know, some of my best friends are old people. But it sounds like a community that's not going to be very young, let's put it that way, and not a future. And I don't know if that's a density issue, a design issue, or an economic issue, or all of them, whatever. How do you get families here? How do you get families to be there? One way would be, and I hope you will consider, raising the affordable housing portion of this. The second thing is the public benefits, if you will. Jay mentioned the $1.3 million in tax revenue. There's also an estimated $550,000 in extra costs. So the net is like $700,000. But then I also wonder, in terms of the public space, how much of that is land that's unbuildable anyway? What are they really giving up? How much of the public space is land that for flooding or other reasons they couldn't build on anyway? And does that matter? Or are we just happy to have it?
To stop there.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank-
Hi, Molly Ettenborough. I'm the city's sustainability manager. Thank you all so much for allowing everybody this opportunity to speak and to hear what all the concerns are. Obviously, there's a lot. I think that's a great list. I think they're all important. I couldn't rate which one is more important, but I think they're all very important. So as you know, and as Andy mentioned, the Energy Advisory Committee as well as the Resiliency Committee have sent in their comments. And I just want to reiterate some. Last year, Mayor Holliday made a declaration to meet net zero energy by 2050 for all city buildings. It's a leadership goal that Newburyport, the city's Energy Advisory Committee, and many other cities around the world are working to achieve. A net zero building is one that produces enough renewable energy on site to meet its annual energy consumption requirements, thereby reducing the need for non-renewable energy. Today in Newburyport, we have two leaders that are doing that, Mark Ritchie and David Hall, with the sustainable village that Hall Moscow is building. So we know that this works. The benefits of net zero include reduced energy and operating costs, greater comfort, business opportunities for attracting conferences, residents, and hotel guests, healthier buildings and occupancy, and physical demonstration of the values of that organization as well as our community. We have sent in our suggestions, as I said, and we hope that you all will take those under consideration. Thank you very much.
Hello, Bill Clary, 14 Johnson Street. I'm a member of the Energy Advisory Committee and have been on for about 2 years. Couple comments just to echo Molly's. As part of the Energy Advisory Committee, I've had an opportunity to read through the master plan put together in 2017, as well as the mayor's commitments for in the C40 agreements, all trying to direct and lead us towards a more sustainable future. There's two key elements that we're looking at with the Energy Advisory Committee. Energy efficient and operation of buildings in their design, as well as renewable energy sourcing. So those are kind of the two key things we've been looking at and I'll hope you consider in these designs. In terms of best practices, well-insulated type buildings, double or triple paned glass windows, all electric appliances, including the energy sources for heating and cooling. We need to make sure we consider cooling as part of the energy load. And then, of course, putting solar panels for either electric or hot water sourcing on the roofs, as well as electric car charging. The benefits, as Molly said, there are operating cost advantages when we have more energy efficient buildings. When somebody is trying to purchase some of the units, it may help with the financing, and of course, the livability can be improved. So thank you for all your time and consideration.
Hello, my name is Rick England. I'm at 73 Washington Street. I also am part of the Energy Advisory Committee, and I agree with the comments that Molly and Bill just made. I want to point out to the committee that my points are related to number 6 on that, which is energy efficiency and sustainability. The goal for the Waterfront West project from the advisory committee's perspective is to make sure that the buildings design support the city's goal to reduce the emissions and ultimately help us achieve net zero energy use, which is what Molly pointed out initially. The benefits of doing this are clear. Energy efficient buildings are healthier and safer for occupants. They cost a lot less to operate. They produce less waste because they consume less energy and less water. But most importantly, as Molly pointed out, it's a physical demonstration of the values and the organizations and occupants that live in those buildings. So how do we do this? How do we make this achievable? And what's something concrete that you can look at in terms of changes to the zoning? We on the Energy Advisory Committee believe that the Waterfront West should be built to LEED V4 standard for new construction, and that was updated in July of 2019. And so for those of you who are not familiar with what LEED is, just a really quick overview. It's an acronym. It stands for Leadership in Energy Efficiency and Design and Environmental Design. It is an internationally accepted standard. The Department of Energy has found the LEED certified buildings have 25% lower energy use compared to national averages. To receive LEED certification, a project has to pursue credits, and credits that earn points, and there are 4 levels of certification within LEED: platinum, gold, silver, and certified. And to kind of bring this to bear on what we all know and love in the state of Massachusetts, some examples of LEED are: we have 94 buildings in Massachusetts that are LEED Platinum, 484 that are LEED Gold certified, and even our own Knock-Mullen School is LEED Gold certified. So how do we do this? We on the committee believe that Waterfront West should be built to the LEED 4 standard.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Mike Strauss, 56 Federal Street. I'm the chair of the Newburyport Energy Committee and the last one of us you'll be hearing from. Our appointed volunteers are responsible to give constructive advice on energy matters facing the city. I agree with the previous 3 speakers and will continue with the Energy Advisory Committee's energy recommendations for Waterfront West. Rick just mentioned the LEED certification process. Under that, there are 8 categories to get points. At least 30 of the points should be from the energy and atmosphere category. So this is to put some meat on how to get there. Of those 30 points, at least 18 of those points should be from the topic area, optimizing energy performance. This ensures that energy efficiency is built into the project. For whatever reasons, it may not be possible for the developer to get the other 12 points from other energy and atmosphere topics. Under the LEED rules, 18 points is the maximum one can get for the optimized energy performance topic. And that happens when the energy improvement is 50% over some standard. So to give the developer more flexibility, we think the zoning should also propose the ability to increase the optimized energy performance score above 18 points. The increase would be 1 additional credit for each additional 4 percentage points of energy improvement over the 50%. This gives the developer more options to get higher energy efficiency and to be rewarded for it. Finally, we recommend that a total score of 80 points for each building in the development. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Larry Toomey, 6 Prince Place, Newburyport, Mass. You got that? I've been here 88 years, and on the waterfront, 61 years. And I've seen it all. But I am in favor of this development down on the waterfront, on the west side. If you went down there today, if you took a look at that, it's tired. There's broken windows down there. It's terrible. And I love the city of Newburyport. These people are going to invest $100 million into building something down there that's going to look nice. The heights, figure that out. But if they're going to build these condos and apartments. It's not going to affect our schools because you got, you know, the marinas and Parcel 8, the Houghton Yard. There's no children in there. So it really isn't going to take anything. One thing I'm worried about the seniors, on tax base. Newburyport is only 10 square miles. There's no more room for development in Newburyport. So years to come, if you don't build up your tax base, everybody's going to be leaving town. And then you're going to end up with what they did before. So I just want to, you know, put my 2 cents worth in, and I am for the development down there. Let's do something. I think everybody in this room loves Newburyport. And there's 18,000 people in the city of Newburyport, and I'll bet you there's 18,000 different versions of what we should do with that waterfront. So I'd like to read a letter that I have here. After enjoying my various business interests and activities since 1960 on Newburyport waterfront, I would like to share some of my comments on Ned's latest Waterfront West proposal. My first thought is the entire area in question is in dire need of some upgrades and improvements. The proposed hotel, as many believe, will be a welcome asset for all, particularly for the local slip customers as well as the traveling boaters.
Sir, your
Family and
time
friends
is,
along
your
the
time is
industrial
up,
park.
but may I
Oh, that's
suggest
all right.
that you give that to us, and
Yeah,
we can make
certainly.
copies
Well,
for
thank you
everybody?
very much.
I'm glad you wrote it, thank you.
David Chapfield, 67 Federal Street. I'm the co-chair of the Resiliency Committee, which is looking at how we adapt to climate change. So I'm interested in the section 5 on your list. We have sent you as a committee some input, so we'd like you to take note of that. And previously, back in February, we sent a technical report to the ad hoc committee regarding sea level rise. That sea level rise projection actually has now been, if you like, validated in that it does match Boston's. We're a little more conservative than Boston in the level that we think we'll get to. And when you think about zoning and sea level rise, I think you need to think about the time period that you're looking at. Because if you're looking at 2 foot, then that's going to disappear in 30 years. And a lot of cities look at 30 years because that's the mortgage period. If you look at our town or our city of Newburyport, we value the buildings that are more than 30 years old. And I think zoning should be encouraging for something that stays up for longer than 30 years. You also should take a look at how do you want to protect that benefit of those open spaces that we're talking about, the public spaces, because there is no requirement that I see over flood levels. This zoning area is a major flood hazard, and you should think about that. If you have time, also take a look at weather extremities that we're going to get and heat impacts from climate change. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chris Skiba. I live at 14 North Atkinson Street, Newburyport, with my wife and our 3 boys. I'm in favor of the proposed zoning, and I like NED's project. I have several letters of support here. If I could talk as fast as Andy Port, I could probably get all these read, but since I can't, I'll just read off the names of some of them, and I'll read one. Claude Elias from Oregano's Ristorante is in favor. Mark Goldstein wrote a nice letter from Anna Jakes. He applauded us on our incredible community partner and supporter of our hospital for 15 years. Gabriel Dumont and Christine Morris, who have lived here for 40 years and have a law office downtown. Michael Trotter, who has a business, Crystal Engineering, in the industrial park, is in favor of the zoning. Jeff Caswell, who owns Caswell Mechanical, is in favor of the zoning and likes our project. And Chris Webb, co-owner of Newburyport Brewing Company. And they all make similar points, but I'll read a letter from Byron Matthews that he wrote in favor of the zoning. I'm writing in support of the proposed zoning changes of Waterfront West. The redevelopment and restoration of Newburyport's historic downtown and waterfront commenced nearly 50 years ago. There have been many plans, many battles, and many changes along the way. Today, much has been settled. The waterfront will remain a park and boardwalk, and that should satisfy those who have fought long for no further development on the NRA land. A long-awaited parking garage has been constructed, and now it's open for use. Now it is time to complete a plan that adds components that will support the downtown economy. It's long overdue. Waterfront West offers a substantial, underutilized parcel that will finally be home to a quality waterfront hotel and related mixed-use development. The city has collected no tax revenue on the former NRA lot for decades. Now an expanded permanent park will require a bigger budget for proper care and maintenance. I support the proposed zoning changes. The current development plan that has been presented by New England Development is of a scale that is consistent with the historic densities in downtown, and there will be important additions to areas along the waterfront for public use funded by New England Development, including the continuation of the
Thank you.
boardwalk.
We can take the letter. Thank you very much.
I'm Douglas Phillips, 62 Federal Street. There are benefits to this project, and I'm not personally against the project, but I am against the way it is currently defined, because too much of a good thing can become bad. As we look at it, the very best drawings that could be presented, we can clearly see that there are too many buildings. The buildings are too high, the streets are too narrow, and the residential population is too high itself. An example of the impact of all of that is that canyons get created. If you look in any large city, you can see that tall buildings with narrow streets eliminate much of the visual benefit that comes from sunlight, from views of the river. I know you're talking about buildings that will be perpendicular to the river, but there are still too many. The project is too dense as it is currently presented. In addition, in that area on Merrimack Street, the traffic is already very heavy without the addition of such a major development. I have some recommendations for the council and for the board. So far, over 16 years, you have examined variations of the same basic plan. I think a serious, smaller proposal should be put together and evaluated that would provide you with alternatives in terms of the size of the project. And you should consider that before you actually vote on the code in the master plan. Because once you voted on that code, you can't go back and change it. Now, specifically, I would recommend to you, you indicated that the priority was for public space. And yet in both proposals as they were developed, the public space started out at 1/3, 33%, and then it got reduced to 1/4, 25%. I recommend that you write a code that reverses those proportions. Reverse them. Give public space 66 to 75% of the open space and effectively make the rest of the project proportionate to that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brett Lefebvre, Horton's Yard. I'm going to address my comments mostly to traffic impact of the, Brett Lefebvre, Horton's Yard. The issue is traffic, in particular on McKay's Wharf Road. That's that little street that runs down there. There's a new, in the master development plan that was submitted, I think, July 27th. Is that right? It has some changes. It narrows from 2 down to 1 lane. And there's another change. I think I got it right when I was looking at the traffic flow in the plan, that even though it's down to 1 lane, about 200 feet closer to the river than from the back of Horton's Yard, there's still an entrance and an exit to the parking area north of Horton's Yard, behind the building that's running along McKay's Wharf Road. And so today, you know, somebody who lives there, that garage is like right on that street, and people drive pretty fast today going up and down that. So it's somewhat of a hazard. And even though it's narrowed to 1 lane in the future, further down the road, there's still going to be additional traffic coming from that parking area. So it's still going to be a busy place. And, you know, one of my concerns is I'd like to see in the proposal is just some way to mitigate the traffic there, speed bumps or something of that, some way to make it a little safer there, because right now, many of my co-residents, you know, close calls are often an accident because people coming up and down that road don't expect somebody coming out of a building there. So that's what I hope. In addition, another one of my concerns is the disappearance of Michael's overflow parking. You know, I see that all the time. It runs, it's probably from Thursday to Sunday, about 60 to 80 cars parked there. They will no longer be parking there. They'll probably be parking in our nice new garage. And if they're going down to Michael's, they're going to be walking right down Michael's Way, or McKay's Wharf Way. Sidewalks would be a good thing to add to that. So I propose that. Thank you.
I am Jan Morris, 23 Cherry Street, and I'm just a resident who cares and loves the city, as I'm sure we all do. My concern is mostly about the density of this project. Does something need to be done on the waterfront? Absolutely. But in 2003, when it was proposed, people fought back and said it's too dense. In 2017, I know, Andy, you talked about the numbers, but in 2017, the proposal was 145 residential units. Now it's 215. By the time this project takes off, is it going to be 300, 400 residential units that people say are affordable? I don't understand how, when even the homes that we have around here are not necessarily affordable, how you're going to get a waterfront or, you know, beautiful view of the river that's going to be affordable. I don't know what that's going to look like. I'm also concerned in terms about the impacts of traffic. I had to sit in on Low Street through 4 lights to try and just get through, just to drive down past Hale Street, past the middle school. So the traffic, people, it's been very, very, very difficult. That's been out of control. The sewer, I know they were digging up State Street and they had some extremely corroded, scary-looking pipes that they pulled out. I'm concerned about the infrastructure and what this project will, the impact of that project on that, as well as the number of kids coming into the schools. We have a brand-new school, but it's busting out with the class sizes are getting huger and huger. When you start introducing all these families, I think it's more than what the city can handle, given all the other projects that we have going on. That's my comment. Thank you.
My name is Robert Puffer, and I live at 58 Merrimack Street. And I wanted to talk about the impacts to our environment and our local culture. My belief is that this development, as proposed, is not in line with the core tenets of Chapter 91, Massachusetts Public Water Act. In my opinion, the flood mitigation study and action plan provided on the website is lacking. The soil on the site has the potential of being contaminated with copper, lead, mercury, and other heavy metals and hydrocarbons, as it has been a working boatyard and marina for many, many years. We have been tracking global temperatures for 140 years, and they have been steadily increasing. Over 60% of the warming has happened in the last 35 years. As I speak tonight, we've tied the record from 1992 for having 6 active storms at the same time in the American tropics. Imelda is currently flooding Houston, trapping people in their homes and cars. Last year, we saw the Merrimack overflow its bank and flood the majority of the Waterfront West site on multiple occasions. The Waterfront West site floods regularly, even after moderate rain events. Ice is melting, and over the past 100 years, it's been forecasted or shown that in certain places in New England, it's risen over 12 inches. In the next 30 years, it's estimated to rise between 7 to 9 inches. That's a 200% increase in rate. Decreasing the open space and setback limits as proposed will only making the flooding worse. In the face of the rising sea levels and powerful storms, the town has proposed the idea of relaxing overlay rules. I ask myself why, and I think Mr. Port has answered the question as to why. As the town chases after the revenue at whatever the cost may be for the quality of lives and as I'm concerned, and the culture as a boat building town, I think that this vote is a vote against the environment. and against our town as being a boat building town first, I would say that more and bigger isn't better. More floods aren't better, more traffic isn't better, and I would just say I'm against this proposed change. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bruce Vogel. I live at 5 Bromfield Court. Under the guidance of the State Ethics Commission, I stand here before you as a citizen of this community and as a recused city councilor, so I'm cautious with my comments as I'm a tenant of New England development in the affected area. If I were to take all of those concerns right there and throw them into a hat and pull them out, they would all be number one. Though as it stands, the number one is my biggest concern. The density, the building height, and the massing volume. It just seems way too much going on down there. It's overwhelming. And I think that if you take a look at it closely and if you're down there, it's going to feel like walls. I'm also very concerned about the quality of the open space and the pedestrian connectivity, especially as it goes to what's going to happen to downtown. Our community, our business and retail community downtown is being bled a bit. As you know, retail sales in the United States last year dropped about 50%, whereas online sales increased about 300. So we've got to be really careful. So how are we going to get people down there and not bleed them from the downtown? I'm also very concerned about number 2, where you talk about the mitigation of the project impacts. I want to know, what are the project impacts? What are the impacts on the traffic? What are the impacts on the water sewer, particularly the sewer? As we know, we have considerations with our sewer plant. So I want to know what they are, not just that they're what the mitigations are being looked at. I'm also concerned about the hotel requirement. I'm well in favor of the hotel, and I'd like to see that committed to. I know that there's concerns about what phase that might be. So I think that goes along with the required public benefits, and that should definitely be in place before any of this zoning is, or at least looked at. And then just finally, there's 22 pages of comments from you all. I'd love to see that integrated into the zoning so that I can look at it piece by piece. Thank you all very much.
David Powell, 3 Salem Street. I will be sending you all some material later, but let me just, from that material, take up 2 or 3 points. The 24A, this is an overlay, 24 is the number of overlays we seem to have. Anyway, 24A is the purpose, and the purpose apparently is to encourage a lot of things. But the one purpose, or the 2 purposes that I find particularly absent in terms of directing the zoning, I'm not talking about any proposals, but the zoning, are particularly something that's being talked about by a number of people tonight, and that is the physical location and the special constraints of this area. Any development of this area might reasonably look for a 30 to 50-year life for its structures must take into account the unknowns currently presented by the effects of climate change on sea level rise, both inland and coastal storm events, resulting in flood stage, river levels, and tidal and storm surge, etc., potentially occurring at the same time at record-breaking levels. Failure to make proper accommodation for this will result not just in property loss, but also in an unasked disaster and a financial burdens on the city and the community in ways that we, frankly, at this point, really cannot estimate. The second issue, which I really think should be addressed in the purpose of the zoning, is the problem of access for pedestrians and vehicles from the existing city streets. A number of people have spoken about this, so let me just reinforce what they said. It is the first concern, by the way, mentioned by Jeff Speck. Really is 2 minutes?
That's it. Yeah, but you said you've got it written, so we'd be
I will
very
send
happy
it.
to
Thank
receive
you.
that. Thank you.
I'm Karen Claggett. I live at 3 Coffins Court in Newburyport. I've lived at 3 Coffins Court for 43 years. That doesn't make me a native, but it does make me experienced with some of the discussions over the waterfront and the votes and the various things that have gone on. I am not against development, and I'm not against the hotel, but I feel the need to just reinforce what other people have said about the density and the traffic. I'm really concerned about quality of life. I came here and have stayed here because this is a small town, and that's what I love about it, and I think that's what many people love about it. And while I understand that development is natural, and anybody who lives around here knows that, it's still, it seems to me, incumbent upon all of us to try to keep the qualities of a small town. And I do not think 5-story buildings, and I do not think very narrow streets, and I certainly do not think a lot of traffic on Merrimack Street, because if anybody on a Saturday tries to get through the downtown, I mean, I can walk downtown, so I'm very lucky. But if you have to drive downtown, it's a mess. I've had visitors come, and we've been in traffic for a long, long time. I think all of these things, I mean, I realize that some of these things are opposed. How do you balance development against small town living? But I think we're on the cusp of changing Newburyport from the small town that most of us really like into a mini tourist area or a mini city. And I personally will be very sorry if that happens.
Jane Horton, 30 Purchase Street. I moved here when I was a wild and crazy 20-something and tended bar at Michael's Harborside when it was Tournament Wharf. Watched them blow up the bridge, watched them clean up the front of the waterfront, which was just rabble back then. Rubble, not rabble, rabble also. But I have one more recent concern. Personally, I'm against most of this except for the hotel. But I had an experience watching a building in my neighborhood right near the Brown School, which we've been trying for years to figure out what to do with that, where someone built a building, an addition, a fake condo addition with, you know, the little breezeway that makes it a condo that was way too high, and I knew what he would do. I knew he would just take the slap on the wrist and pay the fine. So my concern is, I assume it's this board that has to be aware of whether or not they're following the rules in height, whatever is decided on, who's going to be the overseer? Because that just got blown off. It was like, okay, you made a mistake, you pay us $25,000, and you can just leave it the way it is. Well, that is not okay in my book. So, anyway, thank you very much.
My name is Novak Niketic, 93 High Street. Bonnie asked about give suggestions, and my suggestion would be ask for 3D model. Ask for 3D model. I mean, that's what Mr. Lambert started from, and I will just emphasize, I cannot understand Andy mentioned that number one point is kind of clarified through these photoshops that we see on the website. 3D model is something completely different. So I would really ask or try to emphasize that this is very important for this project.
Jeanette Isabella, 100 Water Street. I would add to that comment that if we see the model, that we see it against Horton's Yard, so we really get to see what we're talking about. So Horton's Yard should be included in that model, because otherwise, how are we going to tell? You can't give us a 55-foot model. We need to see what it's really going to look like. And I've said it before, I think it's too much. Of course they can build something there. They own the land. But it's too massive, it's too dense, there will be canyons. It's not conducive. It's a gated community without the gates. It's not conducive to this city. And we know what's already happened to this city. Build, build, build. You can't go down any street without seeing cars one after the other lined up. It's too much. We've got to think about what we're doing to this beautiful city. And I just want to point out something that really hit home for me. I went down to the old Black Cow, by the old Black Cow, because I had need to be in that area. And I saw the sign on the old Black Cow building that said Shop Newburyport, and I know that NED owns it. And I thought, well, that's nice. And then I looked at all the shopping venues that were proposed. They're all owned by NED. So it didn't have to say Shop Newburyport. It should have said Shop New England Development. We have to think about what the impact of this is going to be on the city. And are they investing a lot of money? Yeah, but they're doing it because they're going to get a lot of money. So that's it. Just in time.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lou Foscarelli. I live at 58 Merrimack Street. I just wanted to suggest that probably most of us in this room have one time or another looked at a piece of real estate, and we mitigate all the problems with that real estate by saying location, location, location. I'm going to suggest to you Waterfront West's problem is height, height, and height. All the issues from my perspective go away. The density gets better. The unrealistic parking scenario that just was laid out for us tonight gets better. A half a spot for a slip. No guests on weekends, please. Send them to the parking garage. We get involved with a height issue on Merrimack Street. If you saw the rendering or the impression that was on the screen, it makes the parking garage look small. Makes it look like a residential garage almost. And I remember when that was being debated, they took the third floor down because it was too high. And the fascia that is before Horton's Yard is so huge, it dwarfs it. All the issues go away. Well, you know, there is routine and regular parking there by people who go all over Newburyport. They get on the rail trail, they go to the Cow, they go to Michael's Harborside. Where are they going? I know. Send them to the parking garage. You're going to close 125 spaces in the central waterfront. And the answer from the mayor's office was, send them to the parking garage. Well, you reduced it to 208 spaces. How about the employees at the hotel? I wonder where they're going. 120 rooms. They're going to the parking garage. It's unrealistic. It's a fallacy. And there are some certain things in development that are incredible. They're buzzwords. They're gimmicks. Shared parking. Everybody gets all warm and fuzzy. It doesn't work. It only works in certain scenarios where you get a unique situation where people come and go at certain hours and it's very controlled. That situation would just be so out of control, shared parking would be ridiculous. And I love the way they said there's going to be 500 commercial spaces and 300 residential spaces. Who's going to say who parks where? The 500 people that go one place and the other.
Thank you.
My time is up.
Yeah, time's up.
Thank you. You get the point. Thank you for letting me
Thank you very
speak.
much. I'm sorry, does anyone new want to speak? Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, Ms. Reed, but we did that last time where we gave you extra time. There's really no justification. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. Now we were going to give 10 minutes to the landowner if they want to speak. That's a hard 10 minutes.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. My name is John Tuig with New England Development. It's been an interesting evening, as you might imagine. We're not going to make a presentation because we have to tell you, our thought is in 10 minutes, it really wouldn't be appropriate that focuses on the zoning text. But I have to tell you, we saw the comments that came out of the planning board about the zoning text. We thought a lot of them were very good. And we started, actually, we saw that when it came out to the public, and we spent some time on that. And it's really the city zoning text, but a lot of those issues can be addressed. We saw the letter from Horton's Yard. I know Attorney Mead didn't wanted to speak again, but I'd want to assure her and the folks from Horton's Yard that we saw it, we understand it, we understand what their concerns are. I'd like to say here tonight, would like to meet with the folks from Horton's Yard and talk about some of the height issues, because we think we can address some of the things that are there, and especially in the plan. And understand what the plan was. We were asked to, after the ad hoc meeting committee report came out, and after the zoning text came out, to try to produce some renderings. And there is a 3D model that is actually interactive that you can take and turn, and either on your computer or otherwise, to see what those images. Is that final design? No. It's to give a sense of, if one were to develop, what is in the zoning text, what would it look like? There were some very good comments on sustainability. We did submit a report about sustainability. We're spending a lot of time on sustainability and resiliency. I think some of the comments, I think we could help inform those as far as where we have our base set to be able to, because we want these buildings to work and to function and to be certifiable and to be insurable and to be financeable and last for 50 years. So we spend a lot of time in all of our projects on issues of sustainability. We spend a lot of time on energy. And we think that a lot of the mayor's goals, and maybe there is some more text that should be added to the zoning that address sustainability, that address energy, that address climate change and resiliency. And again, we're very supportive of that. We've spent a lot of time figuring out how that could work. So I guess in essence, would like to talk and continue to talk to people who are concerned about it. We tried to give you a sense. I mean, those are all important issues. Yes, we've been trying to address, probably height is number one. We did put larger height on Merrimack Street in our example. I know it's in the ad hoc, and then coming down to 35 feet. And it's very hard for people to understand what that means. And we want to try to be able to show in imagery what that is. Mitigation, we know there are issues of concern with respect to the community, whether it be transportation. We may not necessarily be big impactors on some of this mitigation, whether it be water, sewer, or traffic, but I know people would like us to rebuild, and it's been a long-term project, what is out on Route 1 and that intersection, the traffic lights, and fix up Green Street. And we fully expect that that's something that we're going to be engaged in. As far as parking, we were very much encouraged to include all the parking. You'll notice we have a lot more parking and parking on site. And we can talk about, we followed the ratios that came out of the ad hoc, but we can talk about that. Flood and energy, I spoke to for a few minutes. Hotel, we heard very much that hotel with conference and with restaurant were very important. With respect to the retail and the 10,000, we think that probably 6,000, 7,000 square feet of commercial space. It is not our desire to not have the downtown viable. We want to connect to this, to the downtown. We don't think this is going to be destination kind of retail. It's just not. But it is something that could serve the community and be part of the walkway, and would like to be able to show the community that what you can do along the river could be unique, could be an amazing public space, a programmable space, a space that people from the community and who are with the city could work with us on as far as we program spaces in all of our properties all over the country. We think this could be great Newburyport type space. Affordable housing, when we started this discussion, was around 10%. People said, let's get it up to 12%. Absolutely, and we changed it so it would all be on site. We want to talk about that. Deed restricted, absolutely. So, that certainly as you develop your zoning, and it really is your zoning. I mean, we're offering what this project could be if that zoning were to move forward in the basis of a master plan, but happy to look at that. And then public benefits. What are the public benefits? We did give you a report to give you a sense of what that is. This is a community where our studies, the kind of people that live here, yes, it's not something that's going to generate a lot of school children, but we want to have 3-bedroom units. We want to have that opportunity, and you'll find in affordable that you'll have more children related to that. So those are the things that we touched upon. We're not going to present tonight. Would like to take a lot of those issues back. And I know you'll have further deliberations that we're scheduled to have. Would like to have some input in that. Let us actually also work with some of the abutters some more and some of the resiliency folks and the energy. And maybe we can make some suggestions using our engineers who have some thoughts on that. So with that said, I'm going to conclude and thank you all for the time. There's a lot of time that's been spent on this. I hope we can develop something that works for everybody, that the community can embrace. And that really is our goal. We've been in the community now for a long time. We're a very quiet member of the community. You don't see us out a lot. That is actually just something the way the company is structured and always has been. But thank you for the time again. We appreciate it. And thanks for everybody for coming. We did really listen and took a lot of notes and think about how we can move this forward. Thank you.
So that, we're going to leave the public comment portion open as we're going to leave the public hearing open. I want to thank you again for your efforts, your homework you've done, and the ideas you've brought to us tonight, and your honesty. That's what we really appreciate. So just to remind you, we are going to continue this meeting to next Thursday, September 26th, 7 o'clock in the high school. And we'll have a specific site at the front door so you know where to go. That meeting is going to be focused primarily on deliberation between the planning board and the city council. So you will be in our seats that night. You will be listening to us. And at the end, we will consider having, depending on what time it is and where we are in the process, we will consider having more public comment. But it's really about our time to finally get down to brass tacks and talk about what's important. So at this moment, the Planning Board and the City Council Committee on Planning and Development each has to take a vote to continue the meeting. So could I have a motion, please, from the Planning Board? Don, and a second. Tanya, and all those in favor? And so we'll continue.
Okay, and for the committee, I'll make the motion to continue 1 week, as Bonnie said. I have a second from Councilor Shand. All those in favor? Aye. How about a motion to adjourn? All those in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.
Motion to adjourn for the Planning Board? So moved. Don, second. Rick, and all those in favor? Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.